Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 21st of June, 2023, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me via video link, we've got Alex Thomson and also Debi Evans. So welcome both to the programme. Now we're going to get straight on here with the issue of the it's not passed Parliament yet, but certainly it has been announced, the ban on public body boycotts. So what's this all about? Well, what they're saying is that UK public bodies are going to be banned from imposing their own boycotts or divestment campaigns against foreign countries and territories. Now, of course, they're not talking about foreign countries and territories. They're talking about Israel here. So let's just bring the legislation itself on screen. This is the Economic Activity of Public Bodies (Overseas Matters) Bill. It was introduced into Parliament on Monday by Michael Gove. More on that in a second. And what they're saying is that the Economic Activity of Public Bodies Overseas Matters Bill sends a clear message to councils and other publicly funded institutions that they need to focus on delivering for the public and not spending taxpayers' money pursuing their own foreign policy agenda. Those who break the rules will face significant fines, with ministers amongst those able to conduct investigations and suspected breaches. The bill will stop businesses and organisations, including those affiliated with Israel, from being targeted through ongoing boycotts by public bodies, but also by private companies that are providing a public service. So here's Michael Gove. This is what he had to say. It's simply wrong that public bodies have been wasting taxpayers' time and money pursuing their own foreign policy agenda. The UK must have a consistent approach to foreign policy set by UK government. These campaigns not only undermine the UK's foreign policy, but lead to appalling anti-Semitic rhetoric and abuse. That's why we've taken this decisive action to stop these disruptive policies once and for all. So, Alex, maybe I could welcome you to the programme here and ask, first of all, is this individual foreign policy a separate foreign policy from what the UK is doing, or is this just local authorities and others wanting to make it clear how they feel about the Palestinian issue?
It could very much be the latter, Mike. The term public bodies is very broad in UK law, and it encompasses the organisations set up by government ministries at arm's length as agencies, but also anyone governed by public law, anyone who's thought to be operating under public law. And these bodies are supposed to have legal advisors in-house, and they do, who tell them individually what their duties before the law are. Ultimately, this is His Majesty's government telling these public bodies that since they are creatures of statute, therefore, here's the false syllogism coming in, therefore they don't have their own conscience or interpretation of the law. Some may find, with arguable validity, that they're obliged not to do business with a certain regime, such as Israel, depending on their interpretation of how Israel may be breaching international law. And as you said in the introductory segment there, it will be partly or largely ministers as the legal creators of these bodies, as it were, who are responsible for them, who are judge and jury in this. This is pure administrative law. It looks like it won't get near the courts.
Well, indeed. And my question then is, if they're saying that they're being very clear about this, that it doesn't apply to private companies or individuals. But my question then is, if those private companies are doing business with government in some way, are we going to see some effort to nudge them into following the same kind of policy? I suspect, in other words, would they be effectively sanctioned from accessing government contracts? But just to finish this off, Alex, we shouldn't forget that Michael Gove, the Times of Israel here was labelling him a pro-Israel UK Tory leadership candidate. Let's just zoom in on this, the most pro-Israel candidate. This was, of course, they were talking about this when the replacement for Theresa May was being looked for. But Alex, Michael Gove has a history of taking a very strong pro-Israel line, so it's perhaps not surprising that he is leading this.
Yes, there is a whole wing of the Conservative Party, not to overlook, for example, the presence of Labour Friends of Israel, but there is a particular wing of the Conservative Party, vaguely the right wing, or what they now call National Conservative Wing, which is extremely pro-Israel. There are even rumblings that certain prominent conservatives, Priti Patel has been mentioned, who's been spotted doing some unannounced touring of the West Bank, could break off, potentially even with Nigel Farage, former leader of UKIP, though I doubt that, and form a new party, such as the level of disgruntlement. It seems to be a totally visceral issue for half of the Conservative Party that loyalty to Israel goes first. And if Brian were with us today, I think he would remind us of a David Cameron quotation to that effect.
Indeed. Okay, let's move on. Thank you very much, Alex. And inflation next. Let's bring the main inflation graph on screen here. So CPI is at 8.7%. So it seems to be changing course from the last couple of months, which was downward trend. So that does not seem to be following. What's the main driver? Well, apparently it's air travel, recreation, and cultural goods and services, second-hand cars. These are the types of things that have stalled the fall in inflation. The Bank of England is unlikely to be terribly happy about this because it makes a mockery of their forecasts. But let's have a look at this. This is food and alcoholic beverages, because although food has not been a key driver in the reversal of fortunes this month, it's certainly, the situation is not improving very rapidly with that. So I think it's something around 16% as an average CPI. And food non-alcoholic beverages 18.4% on this particular chart from the ONS. But the core inflation figures, this is the one that's really driving the underlying trends in inflation, and these figures are not going in the right direction. So if we look at core CPI, this is including energy, food, alcohol, and tobacco, and gives a fairly good idea of where or at least the pressures on inflation. And we can see that, in fact, it has been rising for the last 3 months. So March it was 6.2%, April 6.8%, May is now 7.1%. So the fall in inflation that the Bank of England was predicting does not seem to be materializing. And in fact, we would argue that that was pretty clear or pretty obvious that was going to happen. So let's bring Jeremy Hunt on screen because this is what he had to say a couple of months ago about this. We have a plan and we're going to reduce that pressure. And if we're going to reduce that pressure on families, it's absolutely essential that we stick to that plan and we see it through so that we have inflation this year, as the Prime Minister has promised. Well, okay, that's the UK government's position, but he was talking about food inflation, mainly energy prices. We're seeing energy prices coming down, particularly at the petrol pumps and so on. We're starting to see energy prices in terms of gas and electricity come down as well. But that pressure that people faced over the winter is now, of course, being replaced with mortgages and the pressure on house prices starting to tell as well. So we're seeing that the rate of change of house prices is falling, and that isn't going to change anytime soon. But the rising inflation is going to have the inevitable effect tomorrow of the Bank of England putting interest rates up, some people suggesting by another 0.5%, and people already starting to come under severe pressure as they begin to require to remortgage in the next couple of months. Now, I think the current figures, it's something like 400,000 new mortgage deals are going to have to be done in the next few months. And of course, people are finding that in some cases, mortgage repayments are doubling. So the pressure that people felt over the winter with energy prices now being replaced with housing costs. This is what Jeremy Hunt had to say this morning about the potential support on housing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We won't hesitate in our resolve to support the Bank of England as it seeks to strangle inflation in the economy. And the best policy is to stick to our plan to halve it. But I also want to make sure we do everything possible to help families paying higher mortgage rates in ways that do not themselves feed inflation. So later this week, I'll be meeting the principal mortgage lenders to ask what help they can give to people struggling to pay for more expensive mortgages and what flexibilities might be possible for families in arrears.
So, Alex, clearly, mortgage companies are not going to be able to do anything to help. They're always going to charge a couple of percent above the Bank of England base rate. So clearly, he's looking for some kind of deal to be done, maybe about reorganizing mortgages. Maybe we're going to start to see 50, 100-year mortgages coming in an effort to keep people in their homes. That I don't really see any alternative.
It's looking that way, isn't it, Mike? And perhaps our overseas viewers might not be aware just how mainstream it has become, even for high earners in the British economy, certainly in London, to be offered ridiculously long mortgages. Anyone who knows anyone who's working in the City of London, the financial district, will know that they live in 2 or 3 zones out in public transport terms now these days, because even they can't afford the centre, and the mortgage is there. Often the bankers who sell them will say, well, you'll be working till you're 70 or 72, won't you? Yeah, let's just sign here for a 35-year mortgage. This is unthinkable even to nearby countries like Germany, for example, but it is routine. And we see here the spectre of a multi-generational debt being raised. Now, at English law, that's supposed to be impossible. There are countries like Belgium where debt is inherited by the heirs. Is this a de facto way of moving to that situation?
Well, in fact, somebody in the chat box has just mentioned that Rishi Sunak was talking about extended mortgages today. We'll see where that goes and keep everybody posted. But the question, I guess, on my mind is who's to blame? So let's consider this, because, of course, British government wants to tell us it's the Russians. It's the Russians are to blame because they invaded Ukraine, and therefore that pushed up energy prices and that sparked off inflation. Well, I'm going to draw a line through that because that's absolute nonsense. Inflation was baked in from well before the Russians invaded Ukraine. So let's look at the other option that the government wants to divert us onto, the Chinese, because, of course, COVID was lab leak, and that was the Chinese that did that. And therefore, everything that's happened since was all to do with the Chinese. But, of course, the Chinese didn't set our economic policy during the so-called COVID pandemic. And so we're not going to blame the Chinese either. I don't think, Alex, there's only 2 organizations that we can blame for this, in my opinion, the Bank of England and the UK government, because their monetary policy and, most importantly, their economic policy as a result of COVID and at least under the guise of COVID and their money printing that went on particularly over those 2 years. Those are the key drivers of what we're seeing at the moment.
They are, and before 1997, we wouldn't have been able to say there were 2 culprits. They were but one, until the Blair-Brown administration announced the operational independence of the Bank of England for setting these rates. And I would recommend that those who haven't, or even those who have and would like a refresher, should go to ukcolumn.org and find Ian Davis's article, The Private Bank of England Corporation. They may be in for a shock as to who's responsible for what.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alex. Now, Alex, let's move on to France then, and, surveillance.
Yes, in the first week of June, the French Senate was given and voted to approve a draft bill by the Justice Minister to allow surveillance using electronic devices, both computer or personal computing and mobile devices. It's very controversial, and RTL here, a mainstream broadcaster, is pointing that out in its subheader. It's a controversial draft. The text allows for phones and computers, anything connected to the internet, to be activated remotely by the authorities. And this has actually been proposed by a justice minister who, when he was a private lawyer, was noted for getting a large number of defendants off the hook and was supposedly pro-acquittal. But he's changed his tune now. And RTL goes on to give us the detail that one of the things that this draft will allow, if it's signed into law finally, will be real-time geolocalization or tracking for certain infractions. French terms for breaking the law are quite specific, but infractions is just one kind. On the other hand, it will allow for microphones and cameras to be set on, so sound and image can be captured, and this will be. We're told this in order to reassure people in France, of course, that nothing really horrible is happening. This will be reserved for organised crime that tends to be, rule of thumb, €1 million or more. Terrorism, people might say fair enough, and then the other one is what they call in French délinquance, which is an extremely broad brush term. It covers what in common law terms would be called not only felonies, serious criminal offences, but also misdemeanours and infractions. So that is not actually a reassurance at all. And the RTL commentary has already said that this is going to lead to a society of mouchards, a society of snitches. But maybe even the snitches aren't needed at this point because your phone will spy on you. This is something that many Western democracies and Five Eyes countries in the surveillance grid, GCHQ, NSA, have long said, oh no, we will never go this way. But the French now are. And as usual, they're saying it's because we have a problem with terrorism. But of course, wrong speak will eventually fall into the same net.
Well, that's the key point, isn't it, Alex? Because, I mean, what is the definition of terrorism these days?
That is, of course, undefined, and this primary legislation, this organic law, is going to say terrorism is a problem. Then, as we'll be seeing later with reference to the UK, a ministerial schedule or some other kind of secondary legislation will say, henceforth, saying that you don't like immigrants is terrorism. And we saw that already in the blether from the British government in the opening segment, where we can't have boycotts because it leads to rhetoric.
Yes.
Complete nonsense there. And yes, I have one more slide which doesn't quite follow so easily from that, but it is regarding climate panic, which is the other kind of panic. This has been captured last week on Danish mainstream television. The weather forecast as of 4:30 p.m. on a warm June day, Friday last week. But of course, Denmark being Scandinavian isn't exactly tropical. So the highest temperatures they managed there was 18 degrees Celsius in Esbjerg on the west coast. But look, nowadays, Danish weathercasters colour the whole country light red or even angry dark red to suggest that everyone's going to die of heat stroke at 11 to 18 degrees.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Thanks. Now let's come back on the surveillance and welcome Debbie to the program. Let's start off with Viscount Camrose.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'd like to introduce you to Viscount Camrose. I don't suppose many people have heard of him, but he is actually the Parliamentary Undersecretary of State, Minister for AI and Intellectual Property. So I decided to look at a little bit deeper, and there's very little information, but he seems to have been accelerated very quickly into the House of Lords, where he was made a peer in 2022. Then he was in he was a member of the AI Weapons Committee for only 3 months. So when I started to look a little bit deeper, I wanted to know what he was doing now. And I discovered the United Kingdom is something called the United Kingdom's Geospatial Strategy 2030 sets out the government's strategy to drive greater use of innovative location data and technologies across the economy. So what does this actually mean? And when you actually go into the document, you'll see what it means. It means sensors. And I've just copied and pasted a little bit of the document. It's a big document. I really would advise everybody go and have a look at it, because it's talking about how they can monitor your movements, where you're going, when you're going, how far away from a normal location you'll be. And when I went to look into the document a little bit more in detail, and I do apologise for the next slide because I repeated a copy and paste. So I just want to very quickly highlight 9 points that's in this document. Public health, that means they're going to watch you in gyms and parks. Ocean economy means they're going to be watching shipping and fishing with ambient sensors, remember. Retail means they're going to be watching you in restaurants and coffee shops. Environment means farming and farmers. Infrastructure means they're going to use drones to look around buildings to see if there are any faults in them to make sure you're safe. Transport means they're going to be watching commuters. Emergency response means that they can respond quickly to crime, health, and response to emergencies. And then you've got housing, and they say housing, distribution of housing needs. I'm not quite sure what that means. And finance, this is where it gets interesting. If you use your bank card in a different location to the one that you would normally use it, why? They'll be able to tell. So how free are we in the UK? Because it seems we're going to be surrounded by sensors. I didn't know that something called the Freedom Index actually does exist. So what is the Freedom Index? Well, it was co-published by the Cato Institute, the Fraser Institute, and sorry, Alex, for the pronunciation, Liberal Institute Friedrich Naumann Foundation. And you can see there that if you're in dark blue, the darker the colour, the freer you are. So when I went to look at freedom indexes a little bit more in detail, I also found that there was a mapping of economic freedom. So how economically free are we? Well, according to this map, which is has been produced in collaboration with the Heritage Trust, the Heritage Foundation, sorry. According to this, Canada, I'm sure everybody in Canada that's watching may disagree, but according to this, Canada is the freest of the Americas. And Ireland, you seem to be doing very well for freedom as well. So when we go and look at it globally, on a global basis, we can see that Singapore actually dominates that at number 1. And there you can see Ireland at number 3. And I just honed in on Europe because I thought most people probably watching in the UK, especially today, would be interested in Europe. So there's a screenshot for you if you want to tweet that about, because that's how free we are. And you can see Switzerland there as well, very free. So I didn't know these economic and this mapping was taking place. So I wanted to see more. And I went to look at another one, which is about human impact. So what is the human impact? Well, what do we, why are we responsible? And you can see there from the dark purple and the black, it's less impact. So I zoomed in on Europe because it looks quite bright in Europe. And there you can see the impact. If it's in yellow and orange, it's a high impact. So you can see that Europe is contributing quite a bit to human impact. But how does that figure with companies? Because these companies, you know, that we're all so familiar with. And of course, I went to look at that too. And I was really alarmed to find that you've got Moderna at number 6, 11 is Pfizer, and 12 is Johnson & Johnson, who have just appeared from nowhere. And of course, you've got all the usual culprits, Microsoft and Apple too. So these are the most innovative companies in 2023. So my big question is, how free are we in the UK? Because all is not as it seems, and we are certainly not free. We're being locked in, I believe, and we're being watched.
Yes, Alex, when we look at those graphs that Debi's just shown, the graphics that Debi's just shown, we can see the most free countries are the ones that are also being labeled as having the most economic impact on the planet. And therefore, of course, the leveling up of the world that we're seeing at the moment, which is effectively Great Reset in action, requires this whole of economy transition, as Mark Carney describes it. And of course, the impact that we're having on the world needs to be massively reduced as we head towards net zero. So it can't be a coincidence that the countries that are labeled as the most free are the ones that are having the greatest economic impact, and probably the ones that are, in terms of the trajectory that they're going to, they're heading towards becoming less free on a daily basis.
Yes, these countries, Singapore, Switzerland, Ireland, have got greatest freedom of contract and historically the least tolerance of oligopolies. That's, you know, the stitching up of the market by a few people. And that, I think, is what's being attacked by the oligarchs who increasingly nakedly bear rule over us. They do not want such countries to exist, and it tends to be the smaller jurisdictions, city-states, island states, or mountain cantonal states like Switzerland who go this way. Then the big boys like Germany, who is lagging behind in this economic freedom index, come along and say, "Oi, we want to crush that." And of course, not coincidentally, it's a German that runs the World Economic Forum. That model is being pushed.
Yes. So speaking of freedom, of course, the Public Order Act restricts our freedom to protest, but by how much?
By a great deal, because even minor disruption is now in scope. It's the constitutional aspect of this which is really coming to the fore, because viewers will know that we've been covering the evils of public order legislation, a whole raft of it in Britain for a while. Now, the key word on screen at the moment from Hansard, the record of parliamentary transactions, in this case the House of Lords last week on the 13th of June, is the word regulations. Because regulations, secondary legislation, that is stuff written by government ministries and just waved in front of the nose of Parliament, laid in front of only the lower chamber, the House of Parliament, at House of Commons. And if they fail to object, as you've covered many times before, Mike, that becomes law, but it was never voted on by Parliament or debated by Parliament. The upper house, the House of Lords, has got more scope, but we don't have time to get into the nitty-gritty of it. But let's see what the outrage is, and the unexpected person in the House of Lords who did a sterling job of drawing attention to it, alas, unsuccessfully. So the legislation was introduced that evening by Lord Sharp of Epsom, who is the Under Secretary of State for the Home Office, and the relevant part of his remarks to the House of Lords was that these regulations built further clarity by adding a non-exhaustive list, so police have further discretion beyond this, of examples of serious disruption to the life of the community, a very strange, almost pseudo-religious phrase that we never had in English law before, the life of the community. And so the regulations explicitly say that police or councils can intervene to prevent a hindrance that is more than minor to the carrying out of day-to-day activities, such as making a journey. This is, of course, these staged sit-ins. Read Simon Elmer's piece, The Politics of Environmental Fundamentalism, on our website to find out what's being done here. But under cover of this Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion sort of pet protesters issue, the fake remedy has come in. The reaction to the problem has come in. We go through on Hansard and we find that it was Baroness Jenny Jones, a member of the Green Party, who heroically coordinated, alas, an unsuccessful campaign. I won't read it all out, but she said that this was a make or break moment for democracy. Her ally who backed her that evening, Lord Coker, Bernard Coker, said that conventions were now being broken. The government was not respecting them. Jenny Jones was quite right to say that we don't have a codified constitution. She did not say we have an unwritten constitution. I think she's been mugging up quite well on the constitution, actually. By convention, she reminded the House of Lords that they've been browbeaten to think of themselves for a century now as the unelected upper chamber, but it's only by convention, as Lady Jones quite rightly said, that they would not block primary legislation. And this is secondary, so she spotted for the first time that there was an opportunity for the Lords to stop this. At root, of course, what's gone on here is that it was in a draft of primary legislation that police could stop a minor annoyance protest, and the Parliament said no. Then the government, the ministry responsible, the Home Office, simply wrote it into regulations, submitted that to Parliament and said, well, how about that then? So that's where it's gone. We'll have to speed through the rest of this, but Jenny Jones said that it's a turning point for parliamentary democracy. This Hansard debate link will be in the show notes, and have a look for the phrase constitutional outrage. You'll see that 3 Lords, if I counted correctly, used that very phrase. Not just Lady Jones. She gave a concrete example of people being told that the police will turn up to and say, your protest is banned because I believe it will cause more than minor disruption, a very low bar. She went on to say, of course, this is too much to read now, but if we don't stop this assault on democracy now, it will become more than a one-off and there'll be no opportunity really to stop it. So this is quite a shock, I think, that to Lady Jones that things have got this far. The vote, unfortunately, was 154 against her amendment to remove that phrase and 68 in support. She had tried to get all the independent Lords, the non-party whipped ones, to stand with her. Rather shows that the point of the House of Lords to be non-political and non-elected is quite right. Green World, in covering this, covered Lady Jones's point quite well. And if you freeze the screen now, you will see that the Parliament Acts, which really cabbaged the House of Lords' role, never envisaged the growth of secondary legislation, which is why Lady Jones was able to use this loophole to call on the Lords to do their constitutional duty. But alas, one after the other, the Lords that evening in the debate said, oh, I'm not going to trouble convention now. We're not elected. We have to know our place. Pretty rotten state of affairs there.
And then there's one final one there, Alex. Suella Braverman actually being taken to court over the ability to protest.
This is the unexpected denouement, actually, that the Home Secretary, so the Interior Ministry to foreign viewers, has now had the what used to be called the National Council for Civil Liberties, now just called Liberty, write to her and saying, our interpretation is that you have broken the law because Parliament rejected this power for police to say this is more than minor disruption, away with you or we'll arrest you, and you've rammed it through using secondary legislation. You've ignored and insulted the will of Parliament. There's the keep it on screen at the moment. Braverman said, of course, this was to do with people being fed up with Just Stop Oil without using them by name. But Liberty is now trying to start a judicial review, take the matter to a judge. And Liberty said that this violates the constitutional separation of powers because the measures had already been rejected by Parliament. So there are a few people, and I wouldn't have expected a Green Baroness and Liberty to be them, but there are a few people who know that we have a written, though not codified, constitution, and it does have separation of powers.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that, Alex. Okay. If you like what the UK Column does, you would like to support us, please head over to community.ukcolumn.org. Your membership very much needed, and you're welcome to join us in the forums and so on, and for extra after the main news programme. You could also pick something up at the UK Column shop, but please do share anything you find on the various platforms, especially on ukcolumn.org and ukcolumnextracts.co.uk. Debi, very, very briefly, your latest blog is now up.
It is mRNA in animals, Pfizer announcing antibiotic shortages, chocolateflation, would you believe? And if you've got any gender critical views, you're not welcome in Wix. That and more.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. And tomorrow, 1 p.m., we're streaming out an interview that Debi did a few days ago with Dr. Naomi Wolf. And the question is, did Pfizer know? A stark but honest warning from Dr. Naomi Wolf. And because we are going to be in Scotland on Friday, there'll be no UK Column news on Friday. So instead, you will get an interview that David Scott is holding with Ben Rubin. And the title is The Rise of Big Data in Healthcare. So a reminder that on Friday, we will be at the Rally for Peace and Freedom outside Holyrood, next to the Scottish Parliament. That's actually at 2 p.m. on Saturday. On Saturday, that is. So that Brian will be speaking at that. David Scott will be speaking at that. A whole bunch of other people, David Clues, Peter Ford, Lauren Wilson, Colin Buchanan, Alex Pearce. So that's Saturday, 24th at 2 p.m. So hopefully everybody that's in that neck of the woods will be able to come and join us there. Okay, let's move on to Ukraine. The Ukraine Recovery Conference was happening today. You can see the scene there. We have Rishi Sunak, nice and small in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, and the huge Volodymyr Zelensky, who of course was holding out the begging bowl once again today. Now we have a couple of little bits of video. Let's just listen to a few seconds of Rishi.
It's clear Russia must pay for the destruction that they've inflicted. So we're working with allies to explore lawful routes to use Russian assets. And on Monday, we published new legislation to allow us to keep sanctions in place until Russia pays up. But beyond that, we must bring to bear a partnership of governments, international financial institutions, and business leaders, all of us here today, to make this happen. The British government will continue to play its full part. And I'm proud that today we're announcing a multi-year commitment to support Ukraine's economy. Over 3 years, we will provide loan guarantees worth $3 billion.
So, Alex, a couple of things to unpack there. First of all, the money that's going is going to be in the form of more loan guarantees, so it's more borrowed money. But this seems to be an attempt to bring the private sector into the funding campaign that the governments have been running. So this isn't just about bringing governments together, it's also bringing in what they describe as major conglomerates and international corporations. And the names that they named in their press release today included Virgin, Sanofi, Philips, Hyundai Engineering, Citibank. Those are the key names that were singled out as taking part in this today. So loan guarantees and, more fusion between government and corporate entities, it seems.
Yes, this is corporatism at its finest, isn't it? Such corporations, mega corporations, as you have named, would dearly love to have the ability to sign treaties directly with governments. But sadly for them, they can't. But if they have a tame government or two in their pocket, they can institute a public-private partnership, a global public-private partnership, one might suggest, in Ian Davis's terminology, to work hand in glove with them. So there's no money involved. It's paper. It's loan guarantees, as you say, and all the action is by the corporations. They're behaving as if they could tell Ukrainian governments and Western governments what to do, perhaps because they can in the current arrangements.
Yes, well, it didn't end there because we've got to bring the City of London in. So let's listen to a second little clip here.
And I am delighted to announce today that over 400 businesses from 38 countries with a combined market cap of $4.9 trillion have now signed up. Now, the City of London has a huge amount to offer in their deep and liquid capital markets and world-class finance expertise. So there is no better place to announce today the new London Conference Framework for War Risk Insurance. This is a huge step forward towards helping insurers to underwrite investments into Ukraine, removing one of the biggest barriers and giving investors the confidence they need to act. With this and everything that we do here, we are sending a message that our support on the battlefield and beyond cannot be outlasted, and that Ukraine's incredible spirit will prevail. Now, in a moment, I'll hand over to my friend, President Zelensky. But first, I'd just like to share something that I heard recently.
Now, I left it there because I wasn't going to inflict his little story on everybody, but he went on to tell a nice little story. So it's on the Number 10 Twitter feed if you want to watch the whole speech from Rishi. I'm quite sure nobody does. And you'll get the little story. But anyway, Alex, I saw you with your head in your hands there. I wasn't quite sure whether that was sheer dismay or what.
It was mind-boggling at the contradiction in terms of insuring for war risk, Mike. If you insure your home contents, your vehicle, of course, in some countries you have to for certain purposes, it's for fire, theft, and third party. That is, unless you fix it yourself, for which there are stiff legal penalties, these are things that other people will do to you over which you have no control. Companies signing contracts of the kind I've translated for many years will talk about force majeure, natural disasters, and acts of God. Again, out of your hands. A war is not an act of God, even in a theological sense. Humans start wars. If you're touting for Ukraine to sign up on the dotted line for City of London war risk insurance, then massive temptation is there for the war to be engineered, prolonged, and protracted so that a generation of Ukrainians pays its annual subscription to the war risk.
I couldn't have put it better. I mean, that's absolutely the case. Now, let's move on then, because during the conference, then Zelensky was speaking to the BBC, and he had this to say: battlefield progress during the counteroffensive has been slower than desired. Well, yes, it has been, and in fact, I just want to end this little segment by putting up this graphic from Il Russo, this shows the progress that the Ukrainians have made, because you see this large pink area on screen. That's the Russian-held territory. And just on the top edge of that, you'll see a couple of little, very, very small, lighter pink areas. And those are the areas where it looks like the Ukrainians made some progress, but have had to withdraw. They're not really there anymore. But the land is now effectively a bit of a demilitarized zone. But Alex, these areas are so minuscule by comparison with the territory held by Russia, it comes to no progress at all, in fact.
Yes, because as Brian was pointing out last time, similar maps were shown. These gains are within the fire zone, the dead zone. You can boast that you've taken a village or two and put a nice box around it, but if there's back defenses by the Russians, you're still a sitting duck, alas. So there's going to be waves of these Ukrainian troops very tragically mown down as this offensive continues, I foresee.
Yes. Okay, well, let's go back to France, in fact, and look at what they're up to with respect to Russia.
Many viewers might recall that Nicolas Sarkozy, as president, had François Fillon as his head of government, his prime minister. Some will know that Fillon then went off and did the same as Gerhard Schröder when he resigned from the chancellorship of Germany. Namely, he went into private business and got very envious and angry comebacks from the political class for doing business with Russian hydrocarbon companies. On the 2nd of May, Mr. Fillon was called to be interviewed by the Parliamentary Inquiry into Foreign Interference in French Democracy. BFM, which is quite a pro-National Front party, and therefore covered this extensively because the Rassemblement National, National Front is the old name, set this committee up to arguably to deflect from accusations that they're pro-Russian. Fillon told them that he wasn't bothered by Russian interference, and one of the key quotations is brought up here by BFM and Radio Monte Carlo reporting on it. He says, if you ask me about foreign interference, oh yes, I've come across it. Most of it came from a friendly country that we call the United States. President Sarkozy and I, as head of government, were eavesdropped on for 5 years by the US NSA. He said there was other espionage of note and concern, Chinese and from several Muslim countries, whipping up sentiment among French Muslims in foreign policy terms. But then he went on to talk about several other things. That the NSA issue is not so new because the Germans have made a big noise about it, but he pointed out it applied equally to France. He was more concerned strategically about what America does to Europe. And in the first of two clips, which is Fillon speaking French with an English fairly good auto subtitle going on underneath, he's talking about the disparity there between what's claimed with regard to Russia and America, particularly talking out that back to de Gaulle's time, France was faced with this problem, this reality really, that it shares a landmass with Russia and has to find a modus vivendi with it, whereas America is very far away.
Notamment sur cette question du rapport entre la France et la Russie. On pourrait résumer ses convictions en disant qu'elles sont gaullistes, mais immédiatement, je vois les ricanements, non pas ici naturellement, mais à l'extérieur, arriver en disant que tout ça c'est du passé et que le monde a changé. C'est vrai que le monde a changé, que la situation est différente aujourd'hui de celle que nous avons connue. Mais il y a une chose qui n'a pas changé et qui au fond était la base de la vision qui était celle du général de Gaulle en politique étrangère, c'est la géographie. Nous sommes sur le même continent que la Russie. Et une immense partie de la Russie est européenne. On peut aimer, pas aimer, combattre, être en désaccord, et il y a bien des raisons d'être en désaccord avec le régime russe, et pas seulement avec celui-là, mais avec tous ceux que la Russie a connus depuis bien longtemps. Ça n'efface pas cette constatation que la proximité de la Russie et de notre pays et de l'Europe oblige à trouver un mode de relation avec la Russie qui permette d'assurer la paix et la sécurité. Voilà, vous l'avez très bien dit, tout le monde trouve ça normal parce que ça vient de nos amis américains et donc ça fait partie des choses qui sont... c'est dans la nature des choses et ça n'a suscité que 2 ou 3 jours de commentaires et je pense que personne n'a pris de mesures pour sécuriser les communications téléphoniques des membres du gouvernement, par exemple. Le président Sarkozy et moi-même, nous n'avons jamais utilisé autre chose que nos téléphones portables. On nous a donné à un moment des téléphones cryptés qui étaient tellement compliqués à utiliser qu'on les a jamais utilisés. J'avais un moment souhaité qu'on interdise les téléphones dans certaines enceintes, notamment au Conseil des ministres, mais je n'avais pas réussi à convaincre. Et donc même au Conseil des ministres, il y y avait des téléphones portables, et donc ça veut dire que n'importe qui pouvait écouter n'importe quoi.
So he's saying, like them or loathe them, the Russians are near neighbours, even closer to the Germans and even closer still to the Poles. He didn't add that detail, but he suggests it later. And therefore, if you want to set up a big noise and a talking point about foreign interference so as to tar the French right as Russian collaborators, how ludicrous is that when I said every time that the French cabinet met, the Conseil des Ministres, could we please, ladies and gentlemen, leave our phones outside because the Americans are listening to every word. In the second clip, of course, Fillon is right-wing and oppositionalist, but he's also a Euro-integrationist. Fillon said that he envisaged there was a sound economic argument for making the euro a world currency. He concedes that the Chinese will now take that off the dollar in another part of this hearing on the 2nd of May. But he says, for a moment, just concentrating here on what happened when he did a tour of European finance ministers a decade ago, he says they were all amenable to his idea of really hardening the euro into a global reserve currency, a sink currency, until he went to Wolfgang Schäuble in Berlin, who said, my dear friend, it makes eminent sense, but it's never going to happen. So that clip will follow.
Et on avait bâti un projet. Et j'ai fait le tour des ministres des Finances européens, c'était après 2013 ou 2014. J'ai reçu un accueil relativement poli à peu près partout, sauf en Allemagne. Quand j'ai été présenté à Monsieur Schauble mon projet de faire de l'euro une monnaie internationale, il m'a dit « T'as parfaitement raison, mais on le fera jamais ». Et il m'a dit, on le fera jamais parce que les Américains assurent notre sécurité, nous défendent. Et au fond, je me suis à ce moment-là dit que j'avais pas intégré cette dimension dans le. Et quant à l'idée que l'Europe pourrait exercer une vraie pression sur les États-Unis avec des rétorsions, elle est absolument illusoire, puisque l'Allemagne ne l'acceptera jamais, la Pologne ne l'acceptera jamais, etc. Enfin, en tout cas, à horizon visible.
C'est pratique, alors que la législation américaine était assez claire depuis les années 70.
Il y a une immense hypocrisie américaine parce que les entreprises américaines se livrent exactement aux mêmes pratiques. C'est ça le sujet. C'est pour ça que je ne dis pas qu'il ne faut pas lutter contre la corruption. Je dis que c'est pas aux Américains d'imposer leurs règles en matière de corruption aux entreprises européennes.
And that was the second key moment where he had a go at massive American hypocrisy, which he called it in terms, because American extraterritoriality of law, including corporate law, is his bugbear here. He says US companies are infringing in the same ways that French or German conglomerates are, but if it's a French or German conglomerate, with the help of NSA spying, a case will be built and these companies will be prosecuted under US law. So who is the interferer here? One more slide on that, just to remind people that on the very first day of the current phase of the war, shall we say, the 24th of February 2022, it was covered rather waspishly by the French regional press, West France, that Fillon has said that the Russians had a leg to stand on. And so on the very first day, he deplored the Western refusal to understand or to entertain Russian claims on NATO expansion. So he's made himself a very banned person, but he is a former head of government of a very major European country, saying that the interference is not really Russian, it's American.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Now let's move on to health issues. I'm going to start off with Valneva, the vaccine manufacturer, the vaccine. So that was supposed to be, if you remember, manufactured in Scotland. But the contract to manufacture that COVID-19 vaccine was dropped by the British government. Well, it turns out that didn't mean that we were, or at least Britain's, was off the hook with respect to payment. So Valneva has published or has sent a filing into the Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States. This is it, U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, Form 20F. This is the annual report pursuant to Section 13 or 15D of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934. And so we'll just take a quick quote from this. It says, under the header Vaccine Supply Agreement with the UK Authority, the UK Supply Agreement required the UK Authority to pay a non-refundable advance payment to fund certain manufacturing-related expenses over the life of the project. And as of December 31st, 2021, Valneva had received an aggregate of £369.7 million under the UK supply agreement. Valneva received no additional funds from the UK authority in 2022. So just very briefly, Debbie wanted to get your thoughts on this because still many questions to be asked over the funding of the so-called vaccination program for COVID-19, particularly if you think back right to the very beginning, whenever the government was guaranteeing money to AstraZeneca, despite the fact that there had been no safety data provided for AstraZeneca. Nobody actually knew whether it was going to get any form of approval, or at least publicly, nobody knew that whether it was going to get any form of approval at that time. And we were asking at the time whether there'd been some kind of backdoor deal done to guarantee that approval would be given, or whether they were going to pay the money to AstraZeneca, whether approval was given or not. In this case, we seem to be getting the clue that the money was going to be paid anyway, because that certainly seems to have been what happened here. So whether or not the so-called vaccine was produced, Valneva was still getting the money.
Yeah, it's absolutely shocking. I mean, that's what nearly $250 million that the UK has lost. And I think it's worth noting too that Valneva are a smaller company. But they were repurposed for Livingstone. But what I've heard through the grapevine is that they're actually thinking of repurposing. That factory is very expensive. It's cost a lot of money to set up. And they're talking about repurposing and using it to produce chikungunya virus vaccines and Japanese encephalitis. Both of those involve animals and mosquitoes. So I think there's far more to come on this. But it's obscene, Mike, obscene.
Okay, well, let's move on then to, women's issues.
Oh, ladies. So since October last year, we've known that the EMA have said that menstrual cycles and heavy periods have been associated with the mRNA COVID shots. So we know that. That was back in October 2022. I think you've got that's it. So we know that that's happening. And then I thought, well, I'll go back and look into ladies' health. And even back in 2017, a company called Entity, bear in mind this was 2017, were devising a smart tampon. Now you can see there on the right-hand side, it says the latest thing to add to the Internet of Things, the smart tampon. Has science gone too far? Yes, I believe it has. This is a sensor within you. We've already talked about the geospatial strategy. Now we're talking about cameras within us. And this was in 2017. If we skip forward to today, we can find that Illumina, and we know Illumina are the big genomics company. They partnered with Genomics England. They're embedded into the NHS. You can see that they've gone into collaboration with a company called NextGen. It's a genomics startups, and they'll be looking at fertility. And again, you can see that word accelerator. So let's look at NextGen, and We Are Jane, would you believe? This is who they've coupled up with. And I'm sorry, gentlemen that are watching, but I'm afraid menstrual blood is an elegant uterine tissue-enriched sample which allows for non-invasive routine longitudinal data collection. So it's not only our poo that's valuable for data, it's our menstrual blood. And I'm extremely concerned because as we skip forward, we can see that the smart tampon has really arrived. And so now, could artificial intelligence in a smart tampon detect cervical cancer? This means, ladies, you are going to be inserting a tampon with a highly sensitive camera inside it. If it flashes red, then it means you need to get help or seek advice. If it flashes green, it's perfectly fine. My question is, a medical device, which is what a smart tampon is no longer a medical device. These are spies. These are spies within us. So I'm sorry to hit that for everybody at lunchtime, but I think it's very important that ladies know what is on the market and do they know what they're putting inside their bodies.
Yeah, so certainly surveillance and biosurveillance has been a theme of today's programme. Now let's just very briefly come on to the issue of farming. And here's Therese Coffey, because she has been a couple of days ago launching the Nature for Finance event. This is all about bringing together farmers, land managers, investors, and conservation experts to identify new investment opportunities to drive forward actions to mobilise investment in nature recovery, while continuing to keep the nation fed, is the claim. I'm going to suggest that, in fact, keeping the nation fed is the last thing on the government's minds with respect to farming, at least, and I'll explain what that means in a second. But just want to remind everybody that, of course, we're in a situation at the moment where farmers are not getting any support to grow food. At the moment, they're getting support to grow wildflower meadows and other returning the land to nature kind of projects at the moment. It's getting to the point where farmers are earning less money, if they're earning any money at all, actually growing arable crops, as opposed to taking the government money for growing various types of herbal fallow land production and so on. So I'll also just remind everybody that although the farm animals are not exempt from pressure from government, we'll just have a look very briefly at what the latest on what's going on in Dartmoor with respect to this, because farm animals, of course, have been roaming the common land in Dartmoor for hundreds of years. Just remind ourselves of this from March this year. Nature on Dartmoor, reflections from Wes Smith, Natural England's area manager, on how we can ensure Dartmoor's unique wildlife is preserved for future generations. And the way they want to preserve it is to take the farm animals off the common land in Dartmoor. So Natural England is the government's advisor for the natural environment, and they very much want to see that the relationship between farming, nature, and other impacts like climate change are not in balance, and nature is declining in a way that may jeopardize the huge value that Dartmoor brings to local communities and visitors. So they want to see farming gone effectively from that. Now, we highlighted this a few months ago, and this was a tweet from Dr. Adrian Colston talking about comments that the efforts to remove farm animals from Dartmoor are the greatest catastrophe for nature and farming in my lifetime, because in fact, there's no way to control, in this case, Millennia, which is a grass that grows in Dartmoor. It would be out of control without these animals. Now, but the question is, what's this really about? Well, I'm going to suggest, I'm not saying, but I'm going to suggest this is about the industrialization of food production in this country, because we want to take the small farmer away completely. We're seeing this with the culling of cattle in the foot and mouth, right through to the modern day with the culling of chickens and other birds as a result of so-called bird flu. But we've got this going on as well. Genetic Technology Precision Breeding Act now enact. New genetic technologies could help us tackle some of the greatest challenges of our age around food security, climate change, and biodiversity loss. I believe this is what is actually going on here. We want to see so-called agri-innovation, bringing food production out of the fields and into factories and return the fields, they say, to nature, as if farmers haven't been managing nature for hundreds and hundreds of years. But Debbie, let's end then with a range of headlines from around the mainstream press.
Yeah, I just also wanted to bring your attention to a couple of things that I picked up. Sky were reporting that scientists have created synthetic human embryos using stem cells in major breakthrough. And this is under the guise of miscarriage research. And of course, we're seeing a lot of miscarriages and a lot of spontaneous abortions. Now, this is using synthetic embryos. This is exactly what it means. We're not using sperm or ova here. We're using stem cells. So apparently they don't have hearts and they don't have a brain, but no one knows if a synthetic model, which is what this is called, would develop it into a viable embryo if implanted. Very, very dangerous, in my opinion, Frankenstein type experiments. And then skipping on to another headline that I picked up in Politico, in that they're catching up at long last, admitting now that the mRNA injections are causing rare heart inflammation, according to analysis. However, they cite 321 cases. I don't think that's rare at all. In the Telegraph on Saturday, I picked up a couple of tiny little stories, but I thought they were significant. Crocodiles may now hold the key to treating fungal infections. This is the whole antimicrobial resistance agenda starting to rear its ugly head. And they're saying that if crocodiles can swim around in murky water, then they must be very special. So it's all to do with proteins. So keep an eye on that. It's not looking good. And also we can see that they're starting to think about jabbing more people against monkeypox now. It's going to be extended into London. So keep an eye out for sexual health, because we've already seen a rise in gonorrhea and syphilis. And now, of course, we're seeing monkeypox, or mpox as it's called. And then check your briefs. I'll be brief on this, pardon the pun. But so toilet roll and your underwear that you pick up from Marks and Spencer's will soon come with warnings about cancer. Andrex apparently are going to be putting warnings on toilet rolls. Tesco's are going to be putting warnings in their toilets. So we all need to know to stand up to cancer, even when it's not there. I found that shocking. And I also found a conference that was held this Monday, just gone, called the PING Conference. The PING Conference, PING stands for Pharmaceutical Industry Network Group. And I found that they were talking about the MHRA is in transition. What can industry do? Always pricked up my ears when I saw MHRA. And Dr. Shirley Hopper, who's heard of her, but apparently she's the Deputy Director for Innovative Medicines. So I went to look at Dr. Shirley Hopper, and I found this organisation called Antimicrobial Chemotherapy, whatever that is. And it would appear that Dr. Shirley Hopper, she's a GP, but she was then only a medical assessor for the MHRA. So I don't know what makes her an expert in pharmacogenomics. And here we go, pharmacogenomics again. And it's interesting that Dr. Shirley Hopper was also involved in the Manchester Arena terror attack. She was representing the MHRA. I just popped that up so that you could see her email address in case anybody wanted to contact her with regarding pharmacogenomics. And I've got a few more headlines, which I'm hoping to be able to cover in extra.
Super. Thank you very much, Debbie. Thank you for that. We will end there for today. I want to say thank you very much to Debbie and Alex for joining me today. We will be back in a few minutes if you're a UK Column member for some extra. But otherwise, we will see you on Monday at 1 p.m. Don't forget the 2 interviews that'll be out in the 1 p.m. slots tomorrow and on Friday. And hopefully we'll see as many of you as possible on Saturday outside Holyrood. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.